Ete Imhotep Sini Sinet Anquaste Jed Uncle Jah Seneb Dua Henu for listening. This is your brother Asar M. Ka. As usual, greetings family. We greet you in peace, brother and sister. Sebiya Asar M. Ka, ready to do the business today. As you can see the title, ethnicity in ancient Egypt. And let me preface and start this uh, early. We're going to find all cultures in Egypt at some point in time. Um, what we need to do is uncover, and the reasoning for this series, we're going to uncover. Like I'll show my face. I need a haircut. I'm about to cut it in a minute. Just had to, man. Let me tell you, was driving, was taking Shorty to work, ran out of gas, had to run back to the house, grab the gasoline tank, go gas it up, put the gas in, drive back to the gas station, gas it up, come back to the house. I'm looking crazy. So it's Avatar Day. You know what it is. All right. So what we're going to do, and the reason for this, is to show who establishes what at what period in ancient Kemet, in ancient Taset, Taseti, ancient Egypt, Semitawi, because right now you've got Egyptians getting upset because we're saying it's black as if it wasn't in Africa, and as if we're going to cover that. We're going to cover that. You have uh, racism in Egyptology that we have to discuss. Um, and we also have the ancient artifacts, which is what we're going to rely on some of the discussion. So this first show, we're going to uncover some of the things we know before we start to get, and we'll talk about how we know what the archaeology behind it, real scientific stuff, because everybody knows that the Hemet Necher, the ancient priest of Kemet, created the sciences that you use today. Everyone knows this. Science knows this. So we're going to go over the things that they used, and also we're going to look at statements. Statements are important. Um, we're going to look at the evidences, pre-dynastic Egypt, and what we should establish here. We're going to establish uh, African presence, Black African presence. We're going to establish Arab presence, Middle Eastern Arab presence. We're going to eventually establish European, Greek, and Roman European presence in ancient Egypt in ancient times. But one has got to be more ancient than the other. We got to start with who establishes this, and we got to be realistic, fair, and use the evidence. Ready? Scared? You nervous? Don't be. Let's begin. First, I'm going to share my screen. Let me get to where I want to go to here, and then let's share the screen. Sharing is caring. Share it. Voila. All right. So we're going to start here. This is page 12 of an interesting book. Cover your eyes for 2 seconds. The Peopling of Ancient Egypt and the Deciphering of Meroitic Script. The General History of Africa Studies and Documents. This is from UNESCO. This is from UNESCO. Proceedings of the symposium held in Cairo from 28th of January to the 3rd of February 1974, right? I'm born in November of this year, 74. So let's get to the knit and the grit, right? Let's start here, because what this book does is going to establish a couple things. It's going to, we're going to, what we're going to do today is get away from all this I know you see it in the community right now. Cats is discussing each other. They're not discussing information. We got cats dramatically disrespecting each other. We got cats doing this, they doing that. It's a melee. Bring it back to the information. This is what the Aku, our John Henry Clarks, our Dr. Benz, uh, even our living ancestors, Mfudishis, James Smalls, Baba Harus, this is what they want from us. Not this crazy stuff that's going on. When we debate, yes. But when we debate, keep it about the information. We're getting personal shots. We got pedophilia talks. None of that deals with information that's of any use, except for if it's a pedophile, why is he over here with you? Why is he with us? He's not. Separate. That's it. That's it. We need to know who's who so we know who's safe around the children and who's not. None of this other stuff that's going on. All right. So, Jean Vercouter, present state of knowledge. This is the very first part we're going to get into because this very beginning of this book dissects a whole lot concerning how they see ethnicity in Egyptology. And it also tells you how they get to these conclusions about who's who, what's what, and what's where. Um, the problem of the population of ancient Egypt is, let me big it up so you guys can see it too. One of the most complex problems with all, it has been and is still clouded and obscured by sentimental or at least irrational attitudes. So they already say that attitudes concerning this are irrational. To solve it, we must go back to the original sources, which have been subject to so much interpretation, not to say distortion, usually unconscious, that they now need to be brought together and studied afresh. So a new study is needed because of the, like I told you before, the craziness in some of these fields, especially at those times. Indeed, such knowledge as we process or think we possess nowadays on this problem, which is of such great importance to the ancient history of Africa. So when people ask you why we study ancient Egypt, it just laid it out in that statement right there. Such knowledge as we possess or think we possess nowadays on this problem, which is of such great importance to ancient history of where? Of Africa. Is much less precise and coherent than one might hope. It is in fact full of gaps, which are considerable obstacle to a correct interpretation of the sources at our disposal, and which in the present state of our knowledge make a solution to the problem difficult, if not impossible, to achieve. Now, the sources available for studying the population of ancient Egypt are, you may want to write these down in case one of these frauds hop online and start talking stuff about ancient Kemet that they do not know and don't know how to uncover. These are the true scientific methods. A, right here. We're going to begin. Scientific in the strict sense of the term, derived by physical anthropology from the study of the ancient human remains themselves. What does that say again? Derived by physical anthropology from the study of the ancient human remains themselves. That means go look at the bodies, which the dry climate of Egypt has what? Preserved for us. So anybody starts talking about, there's no bodies, there's no this, we don't have this. You're lying. There's plenty. And we'll get into that today. Iconographic, covering all the representations in the form of drawings, paintings, bas reliefs, and statues by the former inhabitants of the Nile Valley, handed down to us by the monuments. So next we want to study the monuments, paintings, and drawings that they leave, such as when we pull up an Amenhotep III, or if we pull up a Ptolemy II, or if we pull up Cyrus, okay? These are there. Third, linguistics concerning the language and writing of a human group, which may provide information on the origins and ethnic nature of that group. So when we talk about the linguistics, they help, and they could give us our precursor to who and how. Not a guarantee with linguistics, but the possibility is there that we can start to trace the who, how, and what through the language. And last, ethnological, involving a comparison between the foregoing sources as a whole and the characteristics of the ethnic or cultural groups known in antiquity. What does that mean? That means once you've done these three, A, B, and C, now we can do a comparison involving who, the cultures of groups in ancient times that had these same behaviors, spoke the same language, looked physically like these people, drew like these people, pottery like these people, created. You understand what I'm saying? This way, it becomes easy for you to determine the who, the how, and the what. Let's go further. Let's go further. This is so you know how to do this. And this is also to show you there are two requirements. Already we see the N word, don't we? There are two requirements for correct interpretation of these various kinds of sources. First, accurate dating of the human remains or evidence in question, a principle which has not always been observed, since dating is often open to doubt when it is not borne out by the carbon 14 test, for example. This is why I tell you guys all the time, dates are suspect. Because I'll pull up a book in this series concerning Abydos, and it's going to tell you one of the previous dates, which is going to date writing in ancient Egypt to about 5000 BC, which is more accurate, in fact, based off of the carbon dating and based off of some of the other things. But this is why I'm telling you, dates are dates are trivial. But let's get to it. A consensus of opinion among the various investigators as to the meaning of the terms used in the final interpretation. For instance, the words Negro and Negroid seem to take on different meanings according to the historians who used them. The word Hamitic, the application of which to an ethnic, which you see in Obanga 73 on page 101 and number 17 references. You see in Cornevin, 1963, page 71, how he did his thing. Rather than a linguistic group is universally depracted, has nevertheless come to designate ethnic groups. It needs to be defined clearly in this sense if it really fits the facts. Okay. So what they're going to do, you're going to see a couple things. You're going to see the rate. You're about to see it now. You're going to see uh, racial groupings. Let's look at it. It says, furthermore, as it seems obvious that one can never speak of a pure race or ethnic group in Egypt, a correct interpretation of the composition of the population of ancient Egypt calls ipso facto for a knowledge of the peoples who were Egypt's neighbors at the time. This is what I always tell you. Ask the Greeks. They'll tell you who was there, who was what. While such information is available in varying degrees for Northwest Asia and Mediterranean Europe, the same is not true of Africa, the Sahara in particular. This fact makes for a certain amount of misrepresentation of the possible origins of the various elements of the Egyptian population. So when we talk origin of ancient Egypt, uh, they're saying that there's some misrepresentation going on where when you talk Asia and Mediterranean Europe, it's easier to see. It's easier to see. The problem which thus arises is, as we shall see, whether human occupation of the Egyptian Nile Valley was continuous or not. Let's go down further. Considering the impressive quantity of human remains, often in a very good state of preservation, which has been discovered in the Egyptian and Nubian Nile valleys, so we see Egypt and Nubia, One may be tempted to believe that there is enough anthropological evidence to form an accurate picture of the origins of Egypt's inhabitants at a particular point in time. That's what we were doing on Smash's channel. We were showing that they came from the south and started to go down north towards the opening of the Happy River, the Nile Valley River, right? This is what we always discuss on that show. At the where we at? Okay. So Egypt's inhabitants, Nile Valley being very unevenly distributed both in space. Okay. So considering the impressive quantity of human which has been discovered in the Egyptian and Nubian Nile valleys, one may be tempted to believe that there is enough anthropological evidence to form an accurate picture of the origins of Egypt's inhabitants at a particular point in time. In fact, numerous as these remains may be, they give us only a very incomplete idea of the original population of the Nile Valley, being very unevenly distributed both in space and in time. Until recent years before the international campaign to save the monuments of Nubia, launched by UNESCO in the 60s, nothing was known of Nilotic anthropology in Paleolithic times, and very little of that Neolithic times. The intensive excavations carried out from the 60s to 64 have to a great extent closed the gaps in our knowledge. But the results have not yet been published, still less analyzed. Also, they concern only northern or lower Nubia and teach us nothing new about Egypt north of Aswan. So you see the direction that they're moving in, even way back then. From the foregoing, it may be seen that physical anthropology can tell us a lot, although the information is often incomplete about A, the Paleolithic period in Lower Nubia alone, the rest of the valley having yielded nothing relating to this period, B, the Neolithic period in Lower Nubia, and to a very inadequate extent in Upper Egypt. If the Tasian culture is regarded as Neolithic, a matter which is in dispute at a site near Cairo El Omari, and lastly, on the western edge of the southern delta, that's by Beni Salama, the pre-dynastic period in Lower Nubia and Upper Egypt, to the exclusion of Lower Egypt, the delta, which has yielded nothing. So what they're telling you right there is that pre-dynastic Egypt starts in Lower Nubia and Upper Egypt. So you already see who the playmates are. We can start to formulate our picture where and what that is. Lower Nubia and Upper Egypt. Now I want you to put your blinders on for a minute because we know Nubia itself is not truly a defined location. It's a corralling of different Nahesi groups in the Sudan and Upper Egypt. So that's what we need to understand first. This area, lower what they would call Nubia and Upper Egypt, is pre-dynastic Kemet. It's pre-dynastic Egypt. It's where it begins. It's prehistoric Egypt. Okay? Okay, let's go further. So it says, to the exclusion of Lower Egypt Delta, which has yielded nothing, or at least where the anthropologic results of the excavations confined moreover to the southern tip of the Delta near Cairo are not yet known, or have yielded only very inadequate information. To the proto-dynastic period in Lower Nubia and Upper Egypt, the Delta having so far yielded scarcely any anthropological information on this period. Let's go a little further. Now, we're not going to read this whole book or anything like that, but there's important parts that you can obviously see we need to know before you start doing your investigations, before you start getting the understanding. What's up, Dasher Ab? What up, Brother Jake? And Antu Dua, Ampu Dua. We going in right now. We'll open the chat a little later. Let me see the comments. There it is. So let's get back to the grind. Oh, here we go over here. All right. So now, so apart from a limited amount of information on the Neolithic period, the delta remains an unknown quantity. Okay. Let's skip down a little bit. The interpretations right here, which have been put upon this basic evidence, have been summed up clearly by Dr. Massoulard, 1949, his book, page 424, right there. Owing to the date at which the work was published, it does not cover the discoveries made in Nubia from the 60s to 64. Incorporating these results into Dr. Massoulard's very objective account, one arrives at the following outline of the population of Egypt and Lower Nubia from the Paleolithic until the end of Proto-Dynastic period 12 to 3000. This outline, of course, takes into account only the evidence of physical anthropology. So what they're basically finding, they haven't said it yet. Well, they kind of go into it there, but they're basically finding black bodies where they're looking in anthropology. So the physical anthropology. What are we studying there? Bodies, physical evidences, different things of that nature. We covered that above. So in Upper Paleolithic times, Lower Nubia was occupied by dolichocephalic race of medium height people like Twas, or what they call disrespectfully Hottentots and stuff like that, right? Bushmen, as they call, right? I've heard those phrases before. The archaeologists note certain links between the population and the contemporary or earlier human remains discovered in North Africa and in Europe, Mechta man and Cro-Magnon man, but refrains from labeling it Negroid or non-Negroid. For the Neolithic period, 8000 to 5000 BC, until the results of recent excavations in Nubia are known, analyst covers only 20 or so precise measurements and the archaeologist's impression of the El Omari site where the human remains were in too poor condition to be measured. These scanty data would appear to point the conclusion that the population of Egypt in the Neolithic period did not belong to the same race as the pre-dynastic populations which were to succeed it in Upper Egypt. That was their claim. In the pre-dynastic period, the Egyptian and Nubian population as a whole appears to have been mixed, consisting of Negroids and dark Mediterranean types, and a type reminiscent of the Cro-Magnon race, and of half caste derived from a mixture of these three elements. The proportions of each element in the population as a whole vary according to the analysts, but they hover in the neighborhood of 30% to 35% Cro-Magnoids and half caste. Thompson and Randall McAveer Falkenberg, this heterogeneity does not, however, prevent some people speaking of an Egyptian race. So, what does it say right here? What does that say? The Egyptian and Nubian population as a whole, notice how they group the Egyptian and the Nubians together. So anyone trying to dispel that Nahesi are the ancient Egyptians, you're done. You can sit down now. It's okay. The doctors have made their conclusion. We'll roll with them. The bodies show what we think. We're rolling with that. My Egyptian brothers currently there, stop getting mad if someone says that they're black, because pre-dynastic times show that they're black. There's mixture too. It didn't leave you out, but they're black. It says the Egyptian and Nubian populations as a whole appears to have been mixed, consisting of Negroids, dark Mediterranean types, so really dark Mediterranean types, and a type reminiscent of the Cro-Magnon race and of half caste derived from a mixture of these three elements. So there's a mixture going on. But do not disrespect the Negroid factor. We have to point that out to you because there's too much racism going on. Now, let's go further. The proportions of each element in the population as a whole vary according to the analysts, but they hover in the neighborhood of 30% to 35% Negroids and 30% Mediterraneans, the remainder being made up of, quote, a mixture of both. This heterogeneity, heterogeneity, I can't say the word ever, heterogeneity does not, however, prevent some people speaking of an ancient Egyptian race. Let's go down. It says, to be honest, even by anthropologists, Zabrowski Moindron, let's scoot up a little bit. And secondly, that the word Negroid is ambiguous. See, now they're going to start to try to discredit the term Negroid. And this is why we say, yes, there's issues with Egyptology. But we'll get to all of this stuff. We're covering it all. Anthropologists frequently draw a distinction between it and the word Negro, without, however, going into further details of its characteristics. They don't want to say they're black, but they're black. Remember, Zahi Hawass said they're black, but they're white. No. And this is why we have to point these things out. So this ambiguity has recently been pointed out. Obanga, 1973, page 53, for those of you who have his book, referring to Shank and to Job's work. Whilst Anderson notes that the distinctive characteristics of the Negroid skeleton, if such exist, are unknown. In the proto-dynastic period, most of the human remains are identical with those of the pre-dynastic period. Say it again. Proto-dynastic period has human remains that are identical with those of the pre-dynastic period. Pre-dynastic Egypt, similar to proto-dynastic Egypt. And as a whole, the Egyptian population remained the same. However, the royal tombs of Abydos, while not bringing to light any new racial elements, contained a collection of skeletons in which the Mediterranean element seems to be markedly stronger than the Negroid element. So they're saying the Mediterranean element skeletons seemed a little bit stronger in the royal tombs of Abydos. That means there's an Arab presence there in Abydos. In the pre-dynastic period, as the proto-dynastic period, a few brachycephalic individuals appear, but they become relatively numerous only at the time of the pharaohs. Such are the results obtained from physical anthropology. An attempt has been made to supplement or clarify these clues. We're going to skip and we're going to go to a different book in just a minute. Using iconographic evidence, taking the latter as a starting point, some have claimed to be able to distinguish 6 different human types in the pre and proto-dynastic periods. A Libyan type, one type from the shores of the Red Sea, and another from the Arabian desert, and 3 other distinctive types, one of which is believed to have lived in Middle Egypt, one in Lower Egypt, and the third in Upper Egypt. Furthermore, on the strength of the rock drawings in the deserts surrounding Egypt and Nubia, it has been suggested that 4 different major human groups should be recognized. Earliest hunters, Hamitic mountain dwellers, ancestors of the present-day Blemis and Behas, early Nile Valley dwellers, and on the edge of the valley to the east, early oasis dwellers. We're going to deal with this Beja thing too. Not today, but we're going to deal with its narrative. Dr. Massoulard has shown the futility of using iconographic sources, and particularly statuettes, for purposes of anthropological identification. He doesn't like it because a lot of the statues show Negroid appearance. I'm just going to tell you if you haven't read his book. A better case can be made out for the use of rock drawings, which is based in part on the amount of patina on the figures, but it is difficult, if not impossible, to relate the results obtained to reliable anthropological criteria of race. In fact, these results are essentially a reflection of cultural, not anthropological criteria. The theories put forward about the population of Egypt, which we are now going to examine, are based on a mixture of evidence drawn from physical anthropology and cultural or even historical characteristics. Now, they've done something when it comes to the bodies, because what you're going to see in a second, they're calling Nubians Middle Eastern. All of a sudden, the Nubian is Middle Eastern because you're finding these bodies there, and they call them darker Middle Easterns. You're going to start to see that, and so what you have, and this is why we talk about the racism in Egyptology. They're going to start to say those who are black are not black, and so that's where you start to get Zahi Hawas's. They're black, but they're white. And this is an issue. This is a problem. Let's go further as we finish this portion up. Following in the footsteps of Elliot Smith and those of Sergey, you guys already know what Sergey and Elliot Smith are about. You already know what they're about. At an earlier date, most Egyptologists uh, take the view that the primitive population occupying the Egyptian and Nubian Nile Valley from the pre-dynastic period onwards, Badarian, Amratian, or Nakata the first, and up to the first dynasty belonged to a dark, here they go, Mediterranean, or again, Euro-African race. Often incorrectly called Hamitic. Euro-African, dark Mediterranean. Stop it. So you see what this is about. Let's go further. This population is taken to have been lusodermic, white, although its pigmentation may have been dark, even black. Let's look at what they subdivide this so-called race into. Its pigmentation may have been dark, even black. It is subdivided into two groups: one Eastern, ancient Egyptians, Bejas, Galas, Somalis, and Danakels. Y'all know what a Somali looks like. Y'all know what ancient Bejas look like. Y'all know what ancient Galas look. Y'all know what ancient Egyptians look like, man. Not to mention the Danakils. So you see what they did right there, right? Who doesn't understand what they just did? Who doesn't understand what they just did right there? They just turned a Somali into an Eastern European. They turned the Somali into a dark Mediterranean. They turned the Bajan Gala into a Euro African and a dark Mediterranean. They turned the Danakil into a Euro. What are you doing? What are you doing? Let's go further. And the other Western Libyans, ancient Nubians, North African Berbers, the Tuaregs and Tudos of the Sahara, as well as the ancient Ganches of the Canary Islands, and lastly, the Fulani. All of those are listed as Euro-African and dark Mediterranean. Do you understand why there is confusion today? They just told you a Libyan, an ancient Nubian, North African Berber, a Tuareg, a Tudo of the Sahara, and the ancient Ganches of the Canary Islands and the Fulani of Ethiopia are Euro-African or dark Mediterranean, not Negroid. Did you guys see that right there? In your face. So-called science just did that. Ethiopians aren't what? Are you a Fulani is not black? Is that what you're trying to tell us? A Nubian is not black. Even although, look, right here, this population, look, this is the trick. This is the trick. Belong to a dark Mediterranean or again Euro-African race, often incorrectly called Hamitic. This population is taken to have been lusodermic white, although its pigmentation may have been dark, even black. And look at the groups they named: Somalis, Nubians, the Fulani. You understand? Let's go a little further before we get out this book. Before we're going to go deeper into this book at a different on a different episode. But you're seeing what's happening in science. Let's go. The distant origin of this human type might be the Olduvai man of East Africa, signs which are found from the end of the Gambelian period onwards around 11,000 BC, and which is related to the Combe Capel race of Cro-Magnon in Europe. You see, they just took those cultures right out of Africa and made them European. This is the problem. This is the problem. Let's go further. This type, therefore, would appear to be African in origin without being Negro. So now you're not black, but you're in Africa, and you're dark, and you're black in the usual sense. Indeed, even those Egyptologists who are convinced of the essentially African nature of Egyptian civilization stress the fact that the population which founded this civilization was not Negro. So now you got all these Negro bodies, you got Negro culture, you got African Negro culture, but all of a sudden you determine that certain African groups aren't Negro because they've come up with this culture. You've done that in our face. This is why we edify you on these types of things so you can know, so you can see the argument, so you can go destroy it. What did Ankh Shashank say? A Nubian would never change his skin. What the hell are they talking about? Now, you can't tell nobody today that a Nubian is not black. You got jokes for their skin color. You got love for their skin color. You done seen some bad chocolate honeys, baby. You ain't gonna tell nobody in Somali. The damn Muslims argue with the Somalis because they black. What are you talking about? Let's go further. The authors are always at pains to point out that the pure Negro element appears to have been minute in the groups analyzed. Two skeletons in 100, for example, at Naga Eder in early pre-dynastic times, and one in 54 in Lower Nubia. Although the anthropologists concur and acknowledge the existence of a Negro component in the mixed population, which constitutes the primitive Egyptian ethnic group, at least from Neolithic times onwards. So they are basically telling you they will go to any extent to find something about a dark skinned Nubian, Fulani, Beja, whoever that's there, that's a body, and try to make a reason or give it a purpose to be anything but Negro, even though it's clearly Negro. It's got to be a mix. Stop it. All right. Although all anthropologists concur in acknowledging the existence of a Negroid component in mixed population, which constitutes the primitive, notice they call them the primitive Egyptian ethnic group, at least from Neolithic time onwards. It will also be observed that, in spite of the composite character of this population, notice how everything is in spite of. It's because of this. It's because you see what I'm saying? You see what's happening. It will also be observed, I'll say it again, in that, in spite of the composite character of this population, which is confirmed by all anthropologists, it is considered to belong to a single race or branch of humanity. According to a well known study by H. Junker, true Negroes appeared in the lower Nile Valley only from the 18th dynasty onwards around 1600. And this is where they shoot themselves in the foot. Junker's conclusions have been accepted by all Egyptologists who, since 1921, have no longer translated the Egyptian word Nehesi by Negro, as had formerly been the practice, and translated instead as Nubian. So you see why they're taking Nehesi out. Because in all your old books, E.A. Wallace Budge and so and so and so, a Nehesi is a Negro. That's what he called it. That's what Bruggish called it. That's what they called it. You know why? Because when you go see those bodies, they look Negro. They're black. They're black. But if they're black, guess what you have to admit to? That black started this culture, which is the argument here. They're telling you right here. This is why they're doing this. The primitive Egyptian ethnic group, at least from Neolithic times onwards. This is the problem. Blacks have started a culture that they don't want to give it credit for. It's got to be mixed. It's got to be from somebody else. Alan H. Gardner's Egyptian Grammar, page 575, Oxford 1927. By Negro, as had formerly been the practice, and translated instead as Nubian. You see the change going Gardner's book. Instead of calling the Hesse by Negro, all of a sudden, no, they're Nubians. Racism. Racism. If Egyptologists are very nearly unanimous on the composition of the primitive Egyptian race from the end of the Neolithic period until the dawn of history, the same is not true for the proto-dynastic period and the first dynasties of the pharaohs. From these periods onward, there is a marked divergence of views. We're going to stop right here in this one. We don't need to go further. We need some more views. We need to see what's going on. We've already seen the racism and the reasoning and the why. We've seen what they've done. They just took Nahesis, Fulanis, Bejas, etc., and they've turned them from black Negroid types into Euro and Mediterranean Africans, Euro African, dark Mediterranean. That's what they just did. You were here ringside to watch it happen. Let's check on the chat real quick. How y'all doing out there? Yes, half of the continent, Dasher Ave, is out of control. Out of damn control. So this is the real now. This is the real information. This is the uncovering. This is the actual uncovering. You guys are ringside to see it so you understand what's happening. With you guys getting to see this information, anytime somebody tries to covet a different argument, they're in trouble with you because you have it. You have the evidence. Now, we're going to go further. This book here, another one you need. Go look it up digitally. Saram Khan's giving you the hookup today. General History of Africa, Ancient Civilizations of Africa. G. Mokhtar is the editor. Another UNESCO. Another UNESCO. Another one. You see it? These are the different volumes. Which volume is this? Volume 2. Let's go to page 45. Let it begin. Evidence of physical anthropology on the race of the ancient Egyptians. It might have been thought that working on physiological evidence, the findings of the anthropologists would dissipate all doubts by providing reliable and definitive truths. That hasn't happened yet. Actually, it has, but you see the racism that's taking place. This is by no means so the arbitrary nature of the criteria used can go no farther, as well as abolishing any notion of a conclusion acceptable without qualification, introduces so much scientific hair splitting that there are times when one wonders whether the solution of the problem would not have been nearer if we had not had the ill luck to approach it from this angle. Nevertheless, although the conclusion of these anthropological studies stop short of the full truth, they still speak unanimously of the existence of a Negro race from the most distant ages of prehistory down to the dynastic period. Let me blow this up a little bit for you. I want you to see it as I see it, ladies and gentlemen. Huh? What does it say right here? Nevertheless, although the conclusions of these anthropological studies stop short of the full truth, they still speak unanimously of the existence of a Negro race from the most distant ages of prehistory down to the dynastic period. It is not possible in this paper to cite all these conclusions. They will be found summarized in chapter 10 by Dr. Emile Massolard's Préhistoire d'Egypte. Massoulard, you need to go get the book. There is no translation of it yet, I don't think. We shall quote selected items only. Here we go. Ms. Fawcett considers that the Nagata skulls from a sufficiently homogeneous collection to warrant the assumption of a Nagata race in the total height of the skull, the auricular height, the length and breadth of the face, nasal length, cephalic index, and facial index. This race would seem to approximate to the Negro. In nasal breath, height of orbit, length of palate, and nasal index, it would seem closer to the Germanic peoples, according to the pre-dynastic Nagatians, are likely to have resembled the Negroes in certain of their characteristics, and the white races in others. Just because they didn't want to say Negro in the other book. As we get more modern in the books, they're just going to say it. It's Negro. It's Negro. It is worth noting that the nasal indices of the Ethiopians and Dravidians would seem to approximate them to the Germanic peoples, though both are black races. So, once again, pointing out what I just showed you, they're comparing Ethiopians and Dravidians to Germans. They're saying Germans have black features. Read it again. It is worth noting that the nasal indices of Ethiopians and Dravidians would seem to approximate them to the Germanic peoples. So they're saying that Ethiopians and Dravidians look like they're Germans, or vice versa, because Germans come after them. They just said it above, up here, approximate to the Negro. though both are black races. The other book wouldn't tell you that. The other book said, well, they're not Negroes, they're more Indo-Europeans, right? They're Euro-Africans, as they put it, right? They're dark Mediterraneans, as they put it, right? Because they don't want to say it started with black people. Just say it started with black people. Stop being racist. If everyone is one culture or one race, the human race, then we cannot have you being so racial when the evidence is clear that black people are there and the founders of the culture. It shouldn't be hard to say human. It just shouldn't be. It's not a big deal. Shouldn't be. It should not be. But yet it seems to be more difficult at every turn. At every turn. For whatever reason. So let's go further. An attempt was made. Here we go. These measurements, which would leave an open choice between the two extremes represented by the Negro and the Germanic races, give an idea of the elasticity of the criteria employed. A sample follows. Let's go down. An attempt was made by Thompson and Randall McAveer to determine more precisely the importance of the Negroid element in the series of skulls from El Amra, Abydos. Remember, they were saying, oh, they've got to be dark skinned Mediterraneans. They're black people. Stop it. They divided them into three groups: Negroid skulls, those with the facial index below 54 and the nasal index above 50. This is the skull, the supposed skull test. Short, broad face and broad nose. Non-Negroid skulls, facial index above 54, nasal index below 50. Long, narrow face and narrow nose. Intermediate skulls assignable to one of the two previous groups on the basis of either. The facial index or on the evidence of the nasal index plus individuals marginal to either group. The proportion of Negroids would seem to have been 24% of men and 19% of women in the early pre-dynastic and 25 and 28% respectively in the late pre-dynastic. This was the supposed skull test. This actually backfires on them also. Keith has disputed the value of the criterion selected by Thompson and Randall McAveer to distinguish the Negroid from the non-Negroid skulls. His opinion is that if the same criteria were applied to the study of any series of contemporary English skulls, the sample would be found to contain approximately 30% of Negroid types. So he already started to debunk it. Keith started to debunk Randall McAveer and his partner's supposed scientific study about the skulls. The converse of Keith's proposition could also be asserted, namely, that if the criterion were applied to the 140 million Negroes now alive in Black Africa, a minimum of 100 million Negroes would emerge whitewashed. So if you took 140 million Negroes and used the same test, 100 million of them would appear to be white. See how we dispelled that argument right there? See how it's phony? Let's try about 60%, if not more, of those people found in the graves are Negroes. As we went through the list of Fulanis and Nubians that they said were not the Negroes, those are the whites. Is this the? I'm hoping you're dispelling the nonsense. I'm hoping this is as clear cut as it can be. It's got to be clear cut as it can be. Let's go further. It may also be remarked that the distinction between Negroid, non Negroid, and intermediary is unclear. The fact is that non Negroid does not mean of white race, and intermediary still less so. Falkenberger reopened the anthropological study of the Egyptian population in a recent work in which he discusses 1,787 male skulls varying in date from the old pre dynastic to our own day. He distinguishes four main groups. The sorting of the pre dynastic skulls into these four groups gives the following results for the whole pre dynastic period: 36% Negroid. Uh oh, look at that. It jumped up, didn't it? Jumped up 36%. 33% Mediterranean, 11% Cro-Magnoid, and 20% of individuals not falling in any of these groups but approximating either the Cro-Magnoid or to the Negroid. 36, 20%, that's about 56%. Didn't I just say about 60%? Probably higher. It's because they're playing with science in our faces. We have to be very cognitive of these things. The proportion of Negroids is definitely higher than that suggested by Thompson and Randall McAveer, though Keith considers the latter too high. Do Falkenberger's figures reflect the reality? It is not our task to decide this. If they are accurate, the pre-dynastic population, far from representing a purebred race, as Elliot Smith has said, comprised at least three distinct racial elements: over a third of Negroids, a third of Mediterraneans, a tenth of Cro-Magnoids, and a fifth of individuals crossbred to varying degrees. Stop it with the nonsense about black people were not ancient Egyptians. That is the stupidest thought you could ever have. We have to dispel that in this show today so we can go forth. The point about all these conclusions is that despite their discrepancies, the degree to which they converge proves that the basis of the Egyptian population was Negro in the pre dynastic epoch. They're black. They're black. The point about all these conclusions, despite discrepancies, proves that the basis of the Egyptian population was Negro in the pre dynastic epoch. Don't let anybody tell you different. Thus, they are incompatible with the theories that the Negro element only infiltrated into Egypt at a late stage, showing that the other book was lying. Far otherwise, the facts prove that it was preponderant from the beginning to the end of Egyptian history, particularly when we note once more that Mediterranean is not a synonym for white. Elliot Smith's brown or Mediterranean race being nearer the mark. Elliot Smith classifies these Proto Egyptians as a branch of what he calls the brown race, which is the same as Sergei's Mediterranean or Euro African race. They're black. See how they tried to steal that from us? And someone had to correct it? The term brown in this context refers to skin color and is simply a euphemism for Negro. That's what it just said. Huh? The term brown is in this context refers to skin color and is simply a euphemism for Negro. It is thus clear that It was the whole of the Egyptian population, which was Negro. It's black. It's black. Just say it. It's okay. It's okay. Barring an infiltration of white nomads in the proto dynastic epoch. We're going to get to our European brothers in a minute. We're going to get to our Arab brothers in a minute. You're not there yet. Science has superimposed you there. And now they're superimposing you back out of there. In Petrie's study of the Egyptian race, see, you guys use Petrie incorrectly. And I'm going to pull up his book in a minute. You guys use him incorrectly. Petrie plays himself. He has to, because he was a part of what we just read before in the other book. And we're going to go into his book in a minute. I'm going to show you why you play yourself when you use Petrie. Watch. It says, in Petrie's study of the Egyptian race, we are introduced to a possible classification element in a great abundance which cannot fail to surprise the reader. Petrie publishes a study of the races of Egypt in the pre-dynastic and proto-dynastic periods, working only on portrayals of them. Apart from this Stetopigian race, he distinguishes 6 separate types: an aquiline type representative of a white-skinned Libyan race, a plaited beard type belonging to an invading race committing perhaps from the shores of the Red Sea, a sharp-nosed type almost certainly from the Arabian desert, a tilted nose type from the Middle Egypt, a jutting beard type from Lower Egypt, and a narrow nose type from Upper Egypt. Going on the images, there would thus have been 7 different racial types in Egypt during the epochs we are considering. In the pages which follow, we shall see the study of the skeleton seems to provide little authority for these conclusions. Little authority for these conclusions. He knew it, we knew it. And when I go into his book, he's going to make it evidently clear in the worst way he could have, because he was ashamed. We'll get to Petrie in a minute. He would have thought 7 different races were there. Why? Because he didn't want that black one there. Let's go further. The above mode of classification gives an idea of the arbitrary nature of the criteria used to define the Egyptian races. Be that as it may, it is clear that anthropology is far from having established the existence of a white Egyptian race. So it didn't exist like that. So when you see the movie Liz playing who's she, Cleopatra, highly unlikely. The part they got best was the Romans coming over and the men around Cleopatra, because they used a bunch of black actors. You don't have to lie to kick it. You don't. Let's go further. Be that as it may, it is clear that anthropology is far from having established the existence of a white Egyptian race, and would indeed tend rather to suggest the opposite. Nevertheless, in current textbooks, the question is suppressed. In most cases, it is simply and flatly asserted that the Egyptians were white, and the honest layman is left with the impression that any assertion must necessarily have a prior basis of solid research, but there is no such basis, as this chapter has shown. And so generation after generation has been misled. And some of the people that get on these panels with you continue to mislead you with non-science. They continue to. They do it every day. Linguistically, we hear, Kemet doesn't mean black. How many times you heard that? in the last 6 months. Last 6 months. How many times you heard, you can't say that they're black? Hmm? How many times y'all heard that stuff, man? That's starting to get on your nerves a little bit. Many authorities skate around the difficulty today by speaking of red skinned and black skinned whites without their sense of common logic being in the least upset. You're illogical. The Greeks call Africa Libya, a misnomer, ab initio, since Africa contains many other peoples besides the so called Libyans, who belong among the whites of the northern or Mediterranean periphery, and hence are many steps removed from the brown or red skinned whites, Egyptians. You see where the conversation is going from these people? This is what we're fighting against. This is what we're fighting against. Because you're changing history, you're repainting walls, you're doing this, you found 700 Greeks. This was about maybe 10 years ago now. They found 700 Greeks in a hole in ancient Egypt, unceremoniously buried. They were just all thrown in there from the Ptolemaic period. They pulled them out, and I told my brother, hush your mouth. That's his name, one of my Sesh brothers. I said they're going to start to use these Greek bodies and replace ancient black people because the mummification happens naturally with the heat and the sand and the dirt over there. And so you can't even trust the mummies they're showing now. It is dangerous right now because the people who are in control of the artifacts. It's very dangerous right now. You hear warning signs in every article. What Zahi Hawass is doing with the DNA is an atrocity, etc., etc. This is why. Just letting you know. Let's go further. In a textbook intended for the middle secondary school, we find the following sentence. A black is distinguished less by the color of his skin, for there are black skinned whites, than by his features, thick lips, flattened nose. But they won't allow us to teach African history in the schools. It is only through these twistings of the base definitions that it has been possible to bleach the Egyptian race. The study of this race's pigmentation can be carried farther by the method described. Actually, Elliot Smith often found patches of skin on the bodies in the mummification methods, which caused skin deterioration, were not yet in use. Let's go a little further, huh? It is worthwhile calling to mind the exaggerations of the theorists of anthroposociology in the last century and the beginnings of the present, one whose minute physio genomical analysis discovered racial stratifications even in Europe, and particularly in France, when in fact there was really a single and by now practically homogeneous people. Today, Occidentals who value their national cohesion are careful to avoid examining their own societies on so divisive a hypothesis, but continue unthinkingly to apply old methods to the non European societies. There is a vendetta against other cultures scientifically. Scientifically, there is a problem here. Let's do it again. Human images of the protohistoric period, their anthropological value. This starts out powerful. The study of human images made by Flinders Petrie on another plane shows that the ethnic type was black. Told y'all don't use Petrie properly. According to Petrie, these people were the Anu, whose name, known to us since the proto-historic epoch, is always written with three pillars on the few inscriptions extant from the end of the fourth millennium before our era. The natives of the country are always represented with unmistakable chiefly emblems for which one looks in vain among the infrequent portrayals of other races, who are all shown as servile foreign elements having reached the valley of infiltration. Terranetter and the Scorpion King, whom Petrie groups together. The Scorpion King belonged to the preceding race of Anu. Moreover, he worshipped men as Set. As we shall see later, men, like the chief gods of Egypt, was called by the tradition of Egypt itself the Great Black, the Great Negro. As we shall see later, men, like the chief gods of Egypt, was called by the tradition of Egypt itself the Great Negro, the Great Black. After a glance at the various foreign types of humanity who disputed, let's go down further, the valley with the indigenous blacks, Petrie describes the latter, the Anu, in the following terms. Let's see how he does it. Before we even get to his terms, let me see the footnote. We thus see that German racism was inventing nothing new when Alfred Rosenberg asserted that the French Revolution must be deemed a revolt of the brachycephalics of the Alpine stock against the dolichocephalics of the Nordic race. They're talking about racism in science, anthroposociology, the fundamental laws of it. So you can see what's going on. If you're white, you should be appalled. If you're black, you should definitely be appalled. If you're Arab, you should be appalled. You should not try to uphold something that is appalling. We are humans. If we're going to start, let's start from the beginning. That's what we're doing. Be appalled. Let's go further. Petrie describes the latter, the Anu. Let's see how he describes the Anu. Besides these types belonging to the north and east, there is the aboriginal race of the Anu, or Anu people, written with three pillars, who became a part of the historic inhabitants. The subject ramifies too doubtfully if we include all single pillar names, but looking for the Anu written with the three pillars, we find that they occupied southern Egypt and Nubia, and the name is also applied in the Sinai and Libya. As to the southern Egyptians, we have the most essential document, one portrait of a chief Terranetter, roughly modeled in relief in green, glazed faience, found in the early temple at Abydos. Terranetter, if you've ever seen Terranetter, remember they called him a Euro-African or a dark Mediterranean. Let me just pull up. I'm just going to pull up Terranetter real quick. Show the image. I could hit that, but we don't need that. Let's go. There's Terranetter right there. You see the brother. That's it. That's the Euro African in Abydos. That's Terranetter right there. Is his name right here in pink. Terra Nature. That's his name. You can see it right there. Terra Nature. Terra Nature. Do he look Euro African to you? You see his fro. Stop it. Stop it. This is racism. Let's go further. Terrible. we find they occupied southern Egypt and Nubia, and the name is also in the Sinai. Let's skip down. Terranetter, roughly modeled in relief in green glazed faience, found an early temple at Abydos. Preceding his name, his address is given on his earliest of visiting cards. Palace of the Anu in Hemen city, Terranetra. Hemen was the name of the god Tufium. Ermin, opposite to it, was the palace of Anu. To the south, Anumenti. The next place in the south is Anti Gefelion, and beyond the Aniyat Seni, Esna. Amit, Amit, Amaleniu list in geographical order the fortified towns built along the length of the Nile Valley by the Anu blacks. And there's the town, Esna. And Anut really, Sut, Set or Reset. And the southern, they call that On, now Hermonthis. And Sharet. Then Dera, they call it birthplace of Aset. And I forgot what that is. Chinet, also called On or Tennis. And you got that one. This is Enu, basically Heliopolis, and Per, etc. So these are the renowned cities of On. I'm gonna touch just a little bit of this, and then we're gonna get ready to close this thing out. I'm gonna hit a few other things just so you know. The common ancestor of the Anu settled along the Nile was Ani or An, a name determined by the word Ket, and which, dating from the earliest versions of the Book of the Dead onwards, is given to the goddess Sar, the wife of Ani. The god Ani is the goddess Anet, who is also his sister, just as Aset is the sister of Osiris, Asar. The identity of the god An with the Sar has been demonstrated by Plate. We should indeed recall that Asar is also surnamed by the Anu, Asar Ani. The god Anu is represented alternatively by the symbol here and the symbol here, which Robert, famous Egyptologist who passed away recently, Robert showed in his video of Game of Thrones on the Oriental Institute's channel. Are the Anu tribes now inhabiting the Upper Nile related to the ancient Anu? Future research will provide the answer to this question. Okay? So the godman is black. They're doing the Indo-European thing. They're doing the Afro-European thing. No, we're not gonna have it. We're not gonna have it. And so I told you we would go to Petrie's book. Let's go to Petrie's book real quick and we'll end it out. Prehistoric Egypt. The older book. Flinders Petrie. Let's go to page 54. Again, got a list of stuff here. Let me make sure I didn't skip it. No, I'm good. So he's going to make a statement, but he lists all these vases and stuff. This is some of the anthropological work because you've got vases, blacktop pottery, different things of that nature. These tell where things come from. So we'll start from here. This is a list of some of the things that are found there. These changes are not at all of equal importance, but they all show mental differences, probably due to social and political change. The totals of these at each date are marked as curves. Above the curve of black top vases, remember we always talk about black top pottery. Uh, our brother Smash actually raps about it in this song, right? Any of us who Saber Reggie, my brother Saber Reggie, when we study this stuff, when we're going in on this stuff, my little brother Jason Edwards, my other brother Uhuru Malcolm. Anytime I'm studying with any of my brothers, if we're going over anything like this, The two latter have not really got as in depth with this with me as the others have, and some of my other partners. You're going to find blacktop pottery. You're going to find things that are Nubian culturally. And so as we go further down, there it is seen that the greatest number of new things begin is at 38, the influence a little preceding the main physical invasion at 40. The ending of old things is mostly at 40 to 42. He's got his number system according to things that took place. Then there are hardly any new things after 50, and the great fall of the old styles is at 60 to 63. Let's scroll down a little bit. All these things he's talking about, these different items. Another new type of the same date is the basket pot with the lid which fits into a groove around the mouth, and other such lids. This style is familiar in the proto-dynastic age, made of glazed ware of black insides. As such, a form of basket is known in early Nubia and was usually in Egypt in later times. Where did it come from? As such, a form of basket is known in early Nubia and was usually in Egypt in later times. It seems that it may indicate a what? A southern origin. A southern origin. Why? Because this stuff that they're finding over here comes from Nubia, early Nubia, and is found in later times, early Egypt. Some outline of the changes in general civilization may now be attempted on the deserts behind the Fayum and across from Egypt to Palestine. Is a large class of worked flints which are never found in the graves in Egypt and which are clearly of Solutrean style. They are akin to those found in the lower levels of Susa. The spread of these flints over what are now barren deserts shows that they belong to an age with some rainfall, that is to say, before the final elevation of the land dried up, the Saharan Sea. And therefore, and before the unchecked evaporation of the Nile made it lose its velocity and drop the mud of the Nile Valley. The age of the Nile deposits is from about 8,000 to 10,000 BC. That date is important because that same rain study is done on the pyramids. So a lot of people be like, but all of them is pseudo with such and such. No, this is the archaeology. It's not going to talk about the pyramids in this book. I have that also. It's not our discussion today. But that 8 to 10,000 BC is because of that. And this is therefore the later limit of the Solitarian flints. They may be much older. Now, in the earliest graves are figures of the Stetiopygus people, probably as slaves to the Slender people. So this is when they're trying to say the blacks were probably slaves to who they deemed Euro African, which is silly. Which is silly. This suggests that they may be the relics of the Solitarian flint workers. There is a less likely source of the Stetopigus people as slaves brought by the incoming Algerian people from Malta, where they are now known to have lived. So they're saying these black slaves were probably from Algerian people from Malta. You know how early Algerians looked, right? We went to the rock art. We went to the rock art. Let me see if I got that's ancient Moroccan rock art. We want that Algerian rock art real quick. This is Algerian rock art. You can see the fro. Getting it in, making the babies. This is the Algerian rock art. Tassilian Ager is also down here. If I go into that, South Oran, Algeria. They don't look like the Algerians of today. I'm just telling you what it is. They got afros and everything. So he's calling those people slaves to the slender faced ones. He has no basis of why. He's just saying that. And he says that right there. So let's go further. But it is much more likely that they are Egyptians. There is a less likely source, look, that the Stetiopygus people as slaves brought by the incoming Algerian people from Malta, where they are known to have lived. But it is much more likely that they are Egyptians. So Algeria is way over there, northwestern Africa. They call it East, but Algeria is pretty high up. It's pretty much West Africa. They're calling them Egyptians. This is Petri. That's why I say you don't know how to use Petri. You got to know how to use Petri. The authority for each of the following data will be found in its place in the preceding pages, and references is therefore needless. He don't even want to reference it. He don't even want to reference it because they're black. Because they're black. So, where am I at? Couldn't see? Uh-oh. Let me make sure there. Let me see. Stop sharing. I'm gonna stop sharing. Let me hit it again. I'm not sure which part you didn't get to see. What I'm gonna do, because we pretty much concluded it, I'll take that last part and we'll go over it again on the next show. Because I don't want to, you know how I do. I do 30 minutes to an hour. Sometimes I'll do a 2 hour. This is the breakdown. So anybody claiming, like I said, that they're not black in ancient times, or this is not that in ancient times, or uh, they're convoluted concerning in ancient times. Let me come live. You have the information there for yourself. You're not going to be duped. You're not going to, it's too easy to knock this nonsense down. Anytime these guys come with any nonsensical stuff about non-African this, your browser has blocked your screen. Click the screen. It was blocking the information. The browser was blocking the damn information. Why? So anytime you run into this type of information where, oh, it's not this, it's not that, it's not, we have the information. We have the scientific study. We have all of that. I can go even further in depth, not necessary right now. What up, love, Mifro? So what I'm going to do, this is our first in the first series. When I come on and do the next one, we're going to go over that same info, not same info. We're not going to cover all of that. We'll go over the last part that you guys didn't get to see with Petri, because I believe that's probably where it's at. So we'll do the Petri portion real quick, and then we'll go into the other information, because right now you're hearing too much nonsensical stuff. And it's no need to, we're not going to keep going with the nonsensical stuff. We're just going to Let's get to the information, the real information, because we have it. It's easy work. It's not difficult. We're going to get into the DNA portions of the Khoisan. We're going to talk about how they get up there in the connections. I didn't even go into I didn't go into the linguistic stuff with the Khoisan yet. We'll be going into that. Uh, because I'm hearing other guys saying that there's no word for cattle and stuff like that. Um, no word for cattle in Zulu. We're gonna go into the Khoi. You see, we're gonna get into the comparison with Kemi, Gumi. We're gonna see the Nama use the word Koma and the comparison with Korma for bull, lamb for oxen. We're gonna see the Goy as opposed to the Kemi, the Gui as opposed to the Kemi, because the G in Koi usually has a sound. We're gonna cover all of that. We're gonna cover all of that. But this is episode one. Take notes. Make sure you get this stuff. Write it down, man. Write your information down. And with that, I'm gonna shoot over to Smash. Let's see what Smash is talking about today. I'm gonna go cut my hair and I might chime in. ETE Emetep Sini Sinet Anquastajet Uncle Jasanet. Remember who you are and be in the SAR, and you'll expound and be further than these other YouTube, whatever they are by far. Trust me. I'll see y'all soon. Emetep.